BBOR, Black Box Online Radio, coming to you from West Virginia. Today we're going back to 2011 to discuss perhaps one of the more famous cases that we're going to mention on this channel, and that is the case of Anders Behring Brevik and the Norwegian bombing of 2011. While this is something that is very well known to most people around the world and doesn't require an enormous introduction, what we can say about it is that it is one that is not going to be easily forgotten. On the 22nd of July, 2011, at 3:26 p.m., a bombing rocked the city of Oslo. Glass was blown out nearly for a half-mile radius. The windows of the Prime Minister's residence were even shattered. And people were just left in this state of hysteria and confusion, trying to figure out what had gone on. But in reality, the person who had detonated the bomb was driving toward Utoya Island, more to the south, and he arrived there at 4:57 p.m., and that is more than an hour, nearly an hour and a half after the bombing. He was arriving at the lake near Utoya Island. He convinced people to take him to the island by disguising himself as a police officer, and he even had his credentials checked, and he was so convincing that they brought him on board. And this is when the larger rampage took place. Some people even say that this bombing that killed 8 people in the city center of Oslo was just the distraction to pull in all the media focus and all the police attention. And, I mean, in many ways, they had no choice. Dozens of people were injured in addition to the 8 people that lost their lives. At 5:40 p.m., the SWAT team was dispatched. After the first reports of the shooting at 5:26, a specialist SWAT team was dispatched from Oslo to Utoya at 17:40 or 5:40 p.m. And yes, we're citing here the BBC timeline. In short, Anders Behring Brevik would go on to kill 69 people on the island, as well in addition to the 8 people that were killed in the city center, making the death toll 77 people. I was also listening to a report from ABC News that cited that he had killed 93 people, but the more famous number that is thrown around is that there were 77 dead victims, as well as countless other people that were injured. And this just left people with the giant questions. Who? How? Why? What on earth happened here? And, I mean, one of the documentaries that was going on at the time was talking about how everybody immediately thought that this was Islamic terrorism. They immediately thought that the perpetrator was going to be someone very much similar to the 9/11 attacks, committing a terrorist attack in the name of jihad, or just trying to go against the West. But in reality, the perpetrator was none other than Anders Behring Brevik, Norwegian national, who was 33 at the time. Back when this happened, I mean, it was startling to people all over the world. I'm sure the Norwegians would have had a much more emotional connection to these events. And while I am an outsider, though, I do remember these things very clearly. Once 2011 kind of was coming to its end around December, and definitely into 2012, people started putting out a lot of TV specials, documentaries, news coverage. I remember at that time, I was just trying to watch all of them. This was one of the cases that I really wanted to follow, because it was like you really just wanted to know what was going on. But I did notice that the portrayal of Anders Behring Brevik was, I mean, not exactly lighthearted, but they would always show the kind of studio-done photos of him, as opposed to just, like, anything other than absolutely nothing else. They would only show him, like, at his best, and making him just look like he was right out of a model photo shoot or something like that. There's just something that kind of stood out to me. One of the things is, about the why. Anders Behring Brevik, of course, wrote a 1,500-page manifesto. He also created a video, 2083, A Europe Without Muslims, that was distributed around the internet. But I was watching the report on the 5th-year anniversary of the Utoya shooting. And first of all, please forgive my Norwegian pronunciation. I'm a West Virginian, not a Norwegian, so I know I'm mispronouncing some of these names. But when they were showing the 5th anniversary upload of this in 2016, they showed that the original title was Knights Templar 2083, from like some photography. And this was what a lot of people also began to talk about around the time of the shooting. Alex Jones, of all people, on InfoWars did something about this, about how Anders Behring Brevik very frequently talked about the Knights Templar and the Illuminati, but the major press coverage in the Western world really just wanted to only present him as a right-wing terrorist. I mean, so that might be kind of one of the first secrets that we can talk about. Some of these connections to Anders Behring Brevik and the Knights Templar seem to be actually somewhat legitimate, even when they produced the film like 22 July, or perhaps July 22nd, I always like to pronounce it that way, which was available on Netflix, kind of a biofilm on Anders Behring Brevik detailing the trial and the events after the shooting, and as well as they kind of depicted the terrorist events themselves. Once again, 22 July, July 22nd, however you'd like to pronounce it. They also mentioned his connections to the Knights Templar, talking about the Illuminati, secret societies, and all of those things. But a lot of that was kind of scrapped from the mainstream narrative, and they only wanted to present him as a right-wing terrorist. I mean, it is fair to say that he was indeed a right-wing terrorist, but they were also kind of distorting the image somewhat. They were kind of distorting the narrative, which is an irresponsible thing to do. So that's the first thing we should say about that's always kind of stood out to me. One of the things that I have not yet examined was, according to InfoWars as well, that the 1,500-page manifesto that had been written by Anders Behring Brevik had parts in it that were directly plagiarized from the Unabomber manifesto. That's one thing that I've never been able to confirm, but maybe if we do a future upload, we can look into that one. I would say, though, that the sad thing to say about the Anders Behring Brevik, and by sad I mean just kind of disgusting, is that there's a certain sense of ingenious that was associated with this plan. He did something terrible. He did something horrible. 77 people lost their lives, dozens other injured. I mean, you can see the videography of the streets of Oslo on the 22nd of July in 2011. Absolutely horrific. But just the way that they detail the steps that he put forward to compose this terrorist plot. I mean, even just the ability that he had to amass $100,000 in 1 year, buying the ingredients for his fertilizer bomb at various times to avoid detection, causing this terrorist attack to put all the attention to the city center so he could target the camp with all the teenagers. Absolutely horrific. But the way that he was able to evade the authorities and evade any sort of detection. Well, and that's sort of what he wanted, to create a way to do that and to show other people how, and to sort of become a major political figure himself. And this is one of the other things that is only rarely talked about, is that the entire motivation for this is, as some people theorize, is that Anders Behring Brevik was thinking that he would become a political icon. That's what his sort of major ambition with this was. It's not even about 2083 and getting Muslims out of Europe. It's about him becoming a political icon for anyone willing to listen. And that people would start looking to him, committing a major atrocity and using it as sort of a media platform to voice what he wanted to say. Now, I mean, when somebody is going to do something like that, does that mean they even care about their motive? Does that mean they even care about anything in a manifesto? Does that mean they even care about anything in that 2083 video? No. That would mean that he cared about what? Attention, his own power, a little bit of notoriety, but mostly having the cameras on himself. A vain and narcissistic thing to do. And that was actually the ruling that the medical board said about Anders Behring Brevik. They said that he was not a psychotic. They said that he was a narcissist. He was an extreme narcissist. And one of the components of narcissism is that a person thinks that they can do no wrong. I mean, they sort of think that they were in the right to do things, or just that they are sort of the center of all forms of, I was about to say morality, but you could say that, but just they're the center of everything, and that his actions are just justifiable because he was the one who wanted them. He was the one who did it, therefore it is a just cause, and he would have done that for everything. Some of the reports about Anders Behring Brevik growing up were very conflicting. At times you sort of hear him sound like a budding sociopath, and at other times you hear him sound like someone who had the possibility to become a very good person. I remember one thing, and I'm not even sure where I read it, could even been from something like Wikipedia or maybe an article, but it said that like someone who had kind of interacted with him as a kid said they believed that he smiled based on the environment, not because he was actually happy. In short, he was faking his emotions. And another report says, though, that he was somebody who became kind of a protector for people. Like, he would defend kids who were being bullied, and he would fight back because he was bigger than a lot of the other people growing up. But one of the things that stood out to me the most was they had an interview with one of his kind of former associates. I don't even know if the guy was a friend, more like maybe an acquaintance, if you will. And the interviewer was trying so hard to press him about like details about Anders Behring Brevik, but the former acquaintance was just giving the same story over and over again, just saying that the only time he really saw him outraged was when a woman preferred a man of a different race over him. And I believe very specifically, the guy said that he witnessed an incident where a woman preferred to date a Pakistani guy over him, and that's kind of what set him off like into sort of an outrageous spiral. I mean, is something like that an issue? Probably. As we've said, though, on a lot of our discussions about serial killers, and serial killers and mass shooters are somewhat different, but when we have had the discussions about serial killers on this channel, we frequently state that line that we heard ages ago. It all comes back to sex. And the sexual drive is one of the most powerful drives in humanity. And that has always been something that I've just remembered that interview so much, because the interviewer is just really trying to say, well, is there something else? Did you ever sort of see him kind of get to a level of outrage in a different way? And the acquaintance is just like, only when, that time, when a woman preferred a man of a different race over him. So it's not even so much like as it is that this guy hated Muslims or hated other races. It's that he felt sexually inferior, so he created something like this to kind of maybe restore his own ego or something like that. Once again, narcissism. Once again, making himself the center of it all. Once again, just kind of craving the spotlight, craving the center of everything. It's not only attention, craving the center of notoriety, creating the center of life, being the most talked about subject in the news, even if it's only for 2 weeks. That's the stuff that Anders Behring Brevik was perhaps going toward. And once again, I'm not a complete mind reader or everything, and it also comes to a certain point when unraveling the thinking of a madman is impractical. But at the same time, a lot of people believe that, based on their interpretations of the evidence, and the interpretations of the media that we have out there, the films, the documentaries, the interviews, the first-hand primary sources about people who knew him directly, saying things just that he was someone who wanted to be kind of at the center of attention, and he was also a person who wanted to be the focus of everything. After the shootings and the bombing in 2011, I think it was about 2012 exactly, I used to be a writer for an entertainment website, and we did one special about where it was just like taking all the comments that people were leaving, promoting Anders Behring Brevik, justifying Anders Behring Brevik, saying Anders Behring Brevik rules, he was a good person, or sort of saying, yeah, he committed a necessary evil, but it was necessary all the same. And then you also have things like, oh, he killed a bunch of libtards, big deal. Now, one of the things, though, back in 2012, I took those comments much more seriously, because it's like people are saying those things, right? But in reality, there are so many people who are just trolling. There are so many people who are just genuinely writing those things to be trolls. They don't necessarily believe them. And I know it sounds like it would go without saying that all the people on the internet don't actually believe what they say. There was a news report that was coming out recently about that. I mean, they're trying to tie it into 4chan, saying that people who post those types of comments are very often 4chan trolls. And there's also been talk about how people who are promoting certain political positions in the United States are paid Russian trolls. They are Russians who are trying to pretend to be Americans to kind of sway the political process. I don't think that one is connected at all to the Anders Behring Brevik issue. At least I see no evidence of that. But it is very possible that some of the people who are promoting Anders Behring Brevik and trying to turn him into some sort of folk icon do not genuinely believe that. They are just trolling. Once again, don't actually think he's connected to the Russians or anything, making that very clear. But some people who say that are just saying outrageous stuff because they want to be annoying. I mean, that type of behavior definitely happens on the internet. It's just perhaps it can, some people are starting to confirm our suspicions a little bit more. One thing, though, that I was very disappointed with was, in terms of trolling, Anders Behring Brevik put out his 2083 manifesto video, 2083, A Europe Without Muslims, and one news report was saying, we need to investigate all of the people who liked that video. And I was like, there is no value in determining who hits the like button or a dislike button on a video. I swear that some people do it just because they see a video with 20 likes and they're like, oh, 20 people liked it and nobody disliked it. I just have to hit the dislike button. I have to go against the tide. I have to swim against the current because I am a salmon. That's what people, I swear people just do that. And it's, that I really don't think there is any value at all in looking at somebody liked a video on YouTube and trying to think that that means that they are genuinely sympathizing with a terrorist. But if they want to talk about it on the news, that's their network, and that's what they want to devote coverage to. So, what we see with Anders Behring Brevik is that he was somebody who knew how to manipulate the system. He was someone who was perhaps rather apathetic to it. And during our discussion on Leopold and Loeb on this channel, like the two killers from the early part of the 20th century, when we were talking about Leopold and Loeb, one of the things that I had brought up was it's very possible that they were people who thought that they were above average intelligence, and they had a certain sense of apathy towards society. If we would look at that in the case of Anders Behring Brevik, the Norwegian bomber, it's like, I'm seeing that type of similarity. Absolutely. Someone who was definitely apathetic to the people that he was murdering, and definitely apathetic to anything other than his own image and his own power. And he writes about this, and from the segments of the manifesto that they would put out in documentaries, he would say things like, wear some makeup, get a professional photographer to take your photo, always look your best, and such. And the reason why he's saying those things is because he wanted people to adore him, in other words. And once again, he wanted to be the center point of it all. But to do that, he had to go about it in somewhat of an apathetic manner, be apathetic toward the other people that he would be murdering, apathy towards society and the rule of law, and the only thing that he would care about is his own domination. Domination is another consistent point that we see with mass murderers and serial killers, like the mass shooters, bombers. Domination. They wanted to dominate other people. That is the driving force for them. And we said the human sex drive is very powerful, and sex and domination and aggression are all linked together. It's almost like a trinity of behaviors. If we're going to be talking about the secrets of Anders Behring Brevik, what I can say is that I really just can't comment on too many of the conspiracies right now. Once again, as I mentioned, even some of the documentaries have talked about this in the past, that they were running drills on Utoya Island prior to the shooting, or that if they were able to get videography of Anders Behring Brevik from the helicopter with a person in the water with his hands up, a sniper could have taken out Anders Behring Brevik. It does seem like the police responded very slowly to this. That much I do admit. I wish that I could comment more on some of the conspiracy theories out there, but I can't. I just don't really have, enough to actually make a solid statement one way or another. I can say the police responded slowly, but that's not enough to endorse a conspiracy. One thing that you can say, though, maybe the conspiracy that we talked about, that the media was intentionally trying to distort the narrative because they thought portraying him as a right-wing terrorist was a much better narrative than portraying him as somebody who talked a lot about the Illuminati and the Knights Templar. No matter what, though, it is completely immoral, unethical. Anders Behring Brevik was wrong. And, some people might not want to hear that. Some people might be using him for certain political purposes. But at the same time, though, he was a disgusting individual who murdered 77 people, as well as injuring countless others, just so that he could kind of turn himself into some sort of iconic self-image hero. He was trying to become his own hero. He probably didn't care about anything in that manifesto. He probably didn't care about anything in any of the videos that he put out other than fueling his own ambition. And this is one of the things that is so important for us to discuss, but many other outlets will not do that. These people who are trying to commit massive atrocities like shootings and bombings and murders, and then act like they have some type of political motivation for it. No. If you have a political motivation for it, start a blog, start a YouTube channel or something like that. You might reach your audience a little bit more slowly, but then you wouldn't have just ruined any ounce of integrity you have, and you wouldn't turn yourself into a disgusting scumbag murderer. Which, unfortunately, that's what Anders Behring Brevik ended up as. So when we're going to talk about this case, I think the sexual motivations behind Anders Behring Brevik are also some things that are downplayed, and people really find the political motivations is a much larger it's a much more attractive narrative for the mainstream media to talk about his political motivations, as opposed to this is just some guy who wants to fuel his own ego and probably had some sort of sexual connection to domination. Aggression, domination, and sexuality. The trinity of murder. Maybe we can throw that into something, kind of look at that and explore that possibility across the cases of other mass murderers, or just other people who commit crimes in general. Well, that's all for me now. That's what I have to leave it, where I have to leave it as. If you like this upload, you can hit the like button. And if you have anything to say at all about the case of Anders Behring Brevik, please drop a comment below. If you haven't subscribed yet, you're welcome to subscribe. And if you want to continue this discussion, please do it in the comments section. I would love to hear from you. Anything you have to say at all about Anders Behring Brevik. I know we're not going to be able to cover the entire story of the Norwegian bombings of 2011 in a 20-minute podcast, but I would love to continue the discussion with you in the section below. And once again, thank you for listening. Until next time.